So what happened with Avowed? What was once being considered the next big thing from Xbox is now being regarded as disappointing by many. In particular, a lot of those hardcore fans that have been following things since the original 2020 trailer are walking away from this new gameplay feeling disappointed or even with some misled. It seems like a lot of this initial reaction came from the art style shown in the Avowed gameplay reveal, because in 2020 we had what appeared to be a dark and almost gritty game, while now in 2023 we're seeing a lot more color and almost Sea of Thieves-esque aesthetic. And regardless of how you feel about the new Avowed gameplay personally, it doesn't seem like this is all made up. We of course went from a CGI trailer to the real thing, but based off some of the recent interviews, it seems pretty clear that things did actually change with Avowed, and if you're somebody who found yourself disappointed after this gameplay, some of the recent interviews may bring things down even further for you, unfortunately. For me, the new gameplay trailer was a bit of a mixed bag. I, like many others, preferred the art style of the original teaser, but I also really liked what we saw on the front of weapons and even potential build paths in the new gameplay. These spells, of course, look absolutely amazing, and knowing Obsidian, there's going to surely be some crazy in-depth RPG mechanics. So even though I didn't exactly love the shift in art style, I was still mostly okay with that, at least until we got this recent interview. Just last week, PC Gamer had an interview with both Carrie Patel, the project lead on Avowed, as well as Fergus, the CEO of Obsidian. And Carrie Patel even went on the Xbox Game Showcase Extended to share a few additional details on what you could expect from Avowed. So as this game begins, your character is going to arrive in a remote corner of the world of Eora called the Living Lands. This is basically the name of the map, the world where Avowed takes place, and it's what we're seeing in this gameplay trailer. We are an envoy of the Adir Empire, and we're sent to investigate a mysterious plague that is inflicting the Living Lands. But of course, not everyone's going to be super happy to have an Imperial representative show up on their doorstep. And honestly, just from the onset, I really enjoy this premise for Avowed. We have to not cure, but figure out what is going on with the mysterious new plague, as well as our position as a member of the Empire will immediately lead others in the world to have a strong opinion on us, one way or the other. And of course, this is Obsidian, so despite our role as an Imperial envoy being fixed, we are able to control our personality, our appearance, philosophy, and even our vibe, whatever that means. So it basically sounds like your core background in Avowed will be largely fixed, but you will have that familiar Obsidian RPG flexibility on how you act. And Obsidian CEO describes how I think where Avowed really shines as an RPG maker is with the evocative, nuanced world building. Stories that are more focused on depth than breadth, and really thoughtful quest design that rewards experimentation and exploration from players. That'll give them a sense of agency, and that gives them a meaningful set of options with how they interact with the world and characters. In Avowed, you're going to be able to play as a human or an elf, but those are the only two choices, and this is actually a pretty big disappointment for fans of Pillars of Eternity. The world of Eora, where Avowed is set, is the same universe as the two Pillars of Eternity games. In those games, you have a variety of races you can choose from, but in Avowed, it's really just going to be two, a human or an elf. Although, Avowed will feature several ability trees to progress through, and there will be flexibility here, as it's described how you won't be locked to a particular class or playstyle. It seems like Avowed's going to have a bit of a different or interesting learned skill system, as it is described that although there will be levels, the focus is really on unlocking abilities rather than putting points into stats to grow stronger. This is definitely the first of those quotes that are making people a little bit concerned. Most RPG fans do enjoy the skill system. They actually like putting points into stats to make themselves stronger. But it almost sounds like in Avowed, you unlock specific combat or utility-based abilities as opposed to having typical skill points or even skill checks. And for me at least, this is one of those things I want to see more about before I have a concrete opinion. I enjoy a traditional skill system, but I'm definitely open to something a bit more interesting or unique with Avowed. So the idea of it being a bit more ability-based doesn't immediately turn me off of it. There's still some interesting or unique combinations they can do with that. What has been one of the most disappointing reveals for many is that Avowed is going to be quite a bit smaller. CEO Fergus has said that the scope in Avowed is more akin to Obsidian's past RPGs like The Outer Worlds in size, compared to a sprawling open world a la Skyrim. In a further interview, we hear that Avowed's size is comparable to the Knights of the Old Republic 2 or The Outer Worlds. And they follow this up by saying this compact scale came naturally via development and the game is going to be first person only. So if you were hoping for something like a full-on Skyrim, Avowed definitely isn't that. Not only in the scale of the game, but also in the interactivity, where they say the world is lightly systemic. Think water and lighting interactions, but not the old bucket on the head trick, meaning that every object in this world won't be interactable like it is in Bethesda Game Studios games. In a few interviews, we're definitely seeing this comparison of Avowed and The Outer Worlds, or really how Avowed is going to be similar to The Outer Worlds. And I definitely think it's a rough one for many fans. The Outer Worlds hasn't aged super well with a lot of fans. It was just a bit too small and a bit too short. It didn't lack the depth that many fans were after. And although I personally am a pretty big fan of The Outer Worlds, I definitely like it and hold it in higher regard than many, I think what happened was a lot of people were really hoping that Avowed was going to be a real upgrade compared to The Outer Worlds, where what we had with The Outer Worlds was fine, but we were hoping that Avowed would finally be Obsidian Unleashed again. While in reality, it really seems like those two games are going to largely be on the same level. And when it comes to the story, they describe that early on Obsidian decided to prioritize a story more focused on depth than breadth, which is one of those lines that definitely gives me pause. On one hand, yeah, that's great. Obsidian are masters of giving us tons of options and choices. Tons of flexibility on how to handle certain interactions is exactly what I want, so I love to hear that that's what they're focusing on here, but at the same time, saying that there's a focus on depth and not breadth, as in how wide the game is, makes me wonder if that's just nice PR speak for saying this is going to be a smaller scale story that isn't quite as expansive as something like Skyrim. So based off these comparisons, it really seems like Avowed's going to have a shorter story similar to The Outer Worlds, where you maybe have a 10 to 15 hour main story and about 25 hours when you add in a bunch of side content. But there's going to be a ton of variation, so replayability is highly encouraged. And the world layout in Avowed is also going to be similar to The Outer Worlds. Avowed is not going to be a fully open world game, but instead set up as a series of open zones. If this does work similar to how it did in The Outer Worlds, there'll basically be a variety of open world areas. One of these might be a major city, but then as you leave that major city, you're going to transition to a different open world area somewhere else. In The Outer Worlds, these open worlds aren't connected. You basically take your ship from one place to another, and that's how you get into different sections. So I wouldn't be shocked if in Avowed, you're taking this boat from one area to the next. But something that is exciting is, in Avowed, they're making companions feel integral to the story and also literally be integral to the story. In Avowed, companions are mandatory, which allows Obsidian to make them much deeper and a core part of your story experiences. They want to create a sense of us venturing into a new frontier with a close group of companions with us. We're going to be sharing our sense of danger and discovery with them. We're going to be able to have two companions with us at any given time, as well as this blue guy from the trailer is one of our companions, and he's named Kai. He served as a soldier and mercenary in the past, but he does have a sense of humor. Character interactions are described as being comparable to The Outer Worlds once again, enough personality and dialogue so it's fun, but also space for whatever headcanon you have around your character and how they should act. But they also describe focusing on combat early on with this game. I feel like this was definitely reflected in the trailer. Avowed's combat and build path potential get me really excited. They describe spending quite a bit of time to get the feel of swinging a sword compared to a mace or an axe just right, as well as you are going to be able to dual wield weapons, including a weapon and magic at the same time. Avowed's going to feature fewer upgrades but more meaningful ones, so when you upgrade a weapon you really feel it, and you're not going to need to play Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2 to play Avowed and actually understand the story, but there's going to be nice throwbacks if you did play those past games. And in fact, one of the characters from Pillars of Eternity 2 will be returning here, and some locations will be even the same. But although I still am excited for Avowed, we are definitely beginning to see this narrative shift. In 2020, and really since then, Avowed felt like it would be Obsidian Unlocked, their first game properly under the Microsoft umbrella, where they have more resources compared to The Outer Worlds and prior. Except now we're learning that really isn't the case. It very much so seems like Avowed will be another smaller scale title, just like The Outer Worlds. I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that changed during development. So what exactly happened here? How did we get this shift? Well, I really think it's a two-pronged issue. On one hand, I do think there was an issue with fans overhyping themselves. Looking back at past interviews, a lot of the comparisons of Avowed being super ambitious or a real competitor to something like Skyrim does come from fan comparisons or even supposed leaks from insiders. Such as one leak saying that Avowed's going to have an even larger open world than Skyrim. This got a lot of attention a couple of years ago. It isn't like Obsidian was coming out and saying these things, and in fact they actually said very little about Avowed outside of just that original teaser. But that isn't the only thing, and it definitely seems like Avowed had development difficulties and features cut. In late 2022, we heard from Jez Corden that some aspects of the game were downsized, and he speculates that this were things like a 4-person co-op mode that they wanted to implement but didn't work out. But even more explicitly, we hear from the CEO of Obsidian how originally we were pitching in essence our Skyrim, but then things changed. That's when we backed up and said, what are we good at? What's our lane? And they expanded that by saying Outer Worlds is the greatest latest example of that, and even Pillars. Pillars is less linear than Outer Worlds, but it's still a game that has you go through a story. And we want to tell more confined stories that the player can experience with their companions and then move from part of the world to part of the world. And like I said, in the end, that's us. Around this time last year, we heard from Jason Schreier that Avowed had gone through multiple reboots and lost or replaced several directors and leads in 2021. So taking this all together, what I think happened is Avowed began as Obsidian's take on Skyrim. That's likely what was reflected in that 2020 teaser. But as they got into full production, they realized that, yeah, that wasn't working, and people ended up leaving the project. Some things were also reworked, and as a result, Avowed evolved into a smaller and more focused game akin to the Outer Worlds. I do kind of wonder if any of this came from the top with Microsoft. We see Starfield seemingly getting all the time in the world, but perhaps that same treatment isn't being applied to every studio. Maybe Avowed had several years of development, started having difficulties, and Microsoft was like, alright, but you gotta rein that in if we want to have it out anytime soon. Or perhaps it really was just all from Obsidian themselves, realizing they needed to rein things in order to make this game a reality. One of the other big questions I'm left with all of this is, what is going on with The Outer Worlds 2 then? The Outer Worlds 2 had a similar narrative that it would really be the bigger, in more depth sequel to The Outer Worlds 1. But now that we know Avowed is actually not going to be quite that large, is something similar happening with The Outer Worlds 2 also? Overall, I still am extremely excited for Avowed. I mean, a first-person AAA RPG from Obsidian will basically always get me excited. But with this new gameplay trailer and even some of the revelations from some of these recent interviews, I definitely have my hype levels a bit lower compared to what we saw in 2020. Although I do really appreciate the transparency. There are plenty of companies that would avoid making comparisons to The Outer Worlds or even avoid describing their games as having a more focused scope. But it does feel like Obsidian is keeping our expectations realistic and in check, and I do appreciate that, and I think it'll really pay off with this game. Sure, there's definitely some fan hype dying right now, but those who do stick around will probably continue to love what they see from Obsidian and continue to love what we see from Avowed. But with that in mind, it seems like Starfield's getting all the resources, and if you want to find out more about that, check out this video with the recent Todd Howard Starfield interview, and they even talk a bit about Fallout 5.